Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Nick Griffin Beyond the Pale. And you're very welcome indeed, whether you're joining me live or whether, as most Brits do, you can join me later on having got home from work. I'm on at this time just because that's the way the schedules go. Otherwise, I might be a bit later. Anyway, so you're all very welcome indeed. Now, I wasn't here last week because I was away driving people all over the place, down south of the border in Eire and also up here in Northern Ireland. So fantastic time, I think, was had by all. Great fun, rather hard work, but that's why I missed you last Wednesday. I've got a feeling, in fact, that the Wednesday before there was some foul up. I wasn't there then. So I've been very much absent, and I fear I've lost some of the regular viewers, in fact. Let me just dive in and see if we've got any in here. Yes, we've got Westover. Greetings to you, sir. And Paul Telford and Kit Bear and Ivan C. Yes, indeed, Ivan. Yeah, so great to see you folks, and whether you join me live or later on, fantastic to be with you. So what I'm going to talk about, well, there's two huge stories in the news, really, of the last week. I mean, enormous stories. One on the world scale, one very important in Britain, and actually further afield in the white world as well. So first of all, the international one, the Iran war deal. We appear to have peace in the Middle East. Now, it's not yet a done deal. The Israeli lobby will do everything they possibly can to derail this. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some really serious false flag, because this has turned out to be a disaster for them. And as you know, they're very powerful people indeed. Donald Trump has done a deal which the lobby which financed his campaign, which dominates the people around him, which controls huge swathes of the media in the United States. They are livid about what's just gone on. Can Trump survive it? Well, given that he's a second-term president and will not be standing again, other than assassinating him, entirely possible, ask JFK, then, well, other than doing that, he's sort of fireproof. But it's enormous. This is an enormous, apart from anything else, this is a gigantic rift between the Zionist lobby and American politics. What's going on? Well, we've got this deal, haven't we? In which, basically, according to Donald Trump, Iran is promising they're never going to build a nuke, so he's won this war. Except for the fact, of course, that before the war, and for years before the war, the Iranians have repeatedly said they are not going to build a nuke. Now, you might believe them or you don't believe them, but we're in exactly the same position now as we were before this crazy war, which is that the Iranians are saying, we're not going to build a nuke. The only difference is that the Iranian leader who used to say, we're not going to build a nuke because they're haram, forbidden under Islamic law because they're so destructive, because of that, we're not going to build one. Well, he's dead. So you've got some more radicals in power now who may actually decide, well, we should have a nuclear bomb. A few months ago, I would have advised them to build a nuclear bomb. Israel has large numbers of illegal nuclear bombs. If Iran had them as well, you'd have mutually assured destruction kicking in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia would probably get them as well. Everyone would have them. No one would dare use them. That's the way these things work. At least, fingers crossed, that's the way they work. But anyway, Iran has found out in this war, I think they probably knew already from the preparations they've done, that they don't need a nuclear bomb. That their simple closing of the Straits of Hormuz with a few cheap drones and a few expensive rockets and a few very cheap mines and some equally cheap fast speedboats, it's enough to bring the world economy basically to its knees over a period where we were heading, and that's enough. So they've got immense power, but they've actually picked up more power than that. So how has this happened? Well, because Iran won the war. Yet they lost the battle for air supremacy. In fact, no, they didn't. They never even attempted to have air supremacy. Donald Trump boasted about destroying their air force. Iran really didn't have an air force. They'd worked out, these people who invented chess, the Persians, thousands of years ago, they'd worked out that faced with the air might of Israel and the United States, any air force they built would be obliterated in the first couple of hours. Therefore, why bother? Instead, go for asymmetric warfare with drones, for instance, which they did very effectively. And we ended up with the position that the Israelis and the US and the Brits, for that matter, and the French were using £300,000 missiles to swat £3,000 drones. That's not good mathematics in a war of attrition, which is what this turned into. So Trump was hoaxed into the war by Bibi Netanyahu. No doubt about it. Although there was also powerful forces around, the military industrial complex, they always want war. But everyone around Trump, his actual cabinet people, Vance and so on, said, do not go into this war. The intelligence services don't go into this war. We said the same thing. Jim Dowson, myself, many other commentators actually said, this is crazy. America's not going to win. They're going to get bogged down in this. It's going to be disaster for everybody, which it turned out to be for everybody. But particularly now that we've got, it appears, peace. A peace agreed anyway. Who's it a disaster for? Well, it's a disaster for the United States deep state. And that, my friends, is not the ordinary people of America. The deep state of the United States has dragged the American people into war after war after war. It's wasted vast fortunes of American money, which would have been better spent rebuilding America's infrastructure, rebuilding American industry, dealing with the opioid epidemic that's killed so many Americans, including an appalling number of veterans from the previous, basically forever wars, which were each one more futile than the other. And the people who dragged America and Americans into those wars with their money and their blood, well, they've taken a bloody nose themselves on this. They've lost power. The military industrial complex, one of the most corrupt, vicious and greedy of all the corporate bodies in the United States, has suffered an enormous blow as well. Well, they'll make it up, but basically it's been shown that the weaponry that the United States had, these fantastically expensive defense missiles, which cost many times the cost of the projectiles, the drones or whatever they're trying to take down, these things are not made to fight war. They're made to make profit for the industrial war machine, and that's what they were doing. So it's particularly daft to spend $300,000, $500,000 swatting a drone with a very expensive missile when you can only make a few hundred of those missiles a year, and only then if China sells you the rare earth minerals. So this is madness, and it's exposed the American military industrial complex as basically one giant scam, and their arms sales are going to go through the floor. The weakness of the United States deep state is, in fact, the United States as a whole is exposed. This is the end of America as the world policeman, for which Americans more than anybody else should thank God. But we should, all the rest of us should as well. If Trump isn't assassinated, then the empty bullying nature of the Zionist lobby, looking apart from the money, the empty bullying nature of everything else, you don't cross us or else, well, it evaporates, doesn't it? Because Donald Trump has crossed Bibi Netanyahu. He's completely sidelined him. And Netanyahu needed this war more than anything else, more than he needs oxygen, in fact, because without this war, his government is going to fall. He is going to end up in court for corruption, and he's going to end his days in prison. And he's been frozen out of this deal totally. It's really quite remarkable. How on earth did that happen? Well, in a way, I told you, I gave you a clue inadvertently as to how this might happen a couple of weeks ago, when I was talking about the way in which the real targets of this Zionist American deep state war are not just the Iranians, certainly not the Palestinians. They're the Saudis and the Qataris. They're the Arabs on the other side. It's America's allies who are actually the main other targets in this. And that what the people running the American deep state, the people who look now at the greater North America with Greenland and Canada's tar sands and the Venezuelan heavy oil and all the rest of it, and America's fracked oil and gas, and think all this is really valuable stuff if we can get the Middle East's energy system destroyed, because unless that's destroyed, none of this is really economically viable. But if we can somehow destroy the oil producing capacity of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates and Iran, then it's quids in for the Greater North American Technate, which of course relied on two things: on the Iranians being sufficiently wound up and provoked to launch ultra-destructive attacks on Saudi Arabia and Qatar and so on, and the Saudi Arabians and the Qataris being stupid enough not to see what was being done. And we just found out, America's just found out, the Zionist lobby have just found out that the Qataris and the Saudis are not stupid. Because for the last few weeks, Qatar, which, like Saudi Arabia at the start of the war, and for years before, was all for crushing Iran, because these people are Sunni and the Iranians are Shia, and they really detest each other, have done for thousands or hundreds of years, ever since just after the death of Muhammad. So that's been their position. And they went into this war, bomb Tehran, go Israel, go America, we're all behind you. Until they found out that the Americans couldn't defend their bases on their soil. And they realized that they were that far away from the Iranians by way of legitimate retaliation in this war, destroying their gas plants, their oil refineries, their exporting platforms, their fertilizer platforms, and their water supply by hitting their desalination plant. And for the last couple of weeks, if not longer than that now, the Qataris, certainly this was in the Guardian the other day, I guess it's true of the Saudis as well, but I haven't seen this anyway for sure, but the Qataris in particular were not only working desperately behind the scenes to get peace, and definitely repeatedly telling Donald Trump, get your finger off the button, stop this, don't have another massive wave tonight, please, 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 or we won't give you any money. They were doing that. But they were also, they drastically slashed their own oil export, even past the problem of what they couldn't get out because of the Strait of Hormuz business. They slashed their oil production and export in order to pile pressure on Trump to go for peace. So the Zionist lobby, Bibi Netanyahu, and the people who pushed Trump into this craze war, and Donald Trump himself, have succeeded in doing what nobody has ever managed to do in the last 1700 years. And that is to bring the Shia and the Sunni together, which is what we've now got. Now, on a civilizational basis, one day for our world, for Christendom, that might be a very bad thing. But for the time being, the fact that the United States deep state has faced its Suez moment, where Britain was in 1956, where all of a sudden all the dreams and ideas and costs of empire go out the window because you've lost. You're no longer the imperial superpower. You're just another moderately important power on this planet. And that's what America now is. It's a very important, ordinary nation and not the world's policeman. It's a direct result of Donald Trump, on behalf of Bibi Netanyahu, starting a war he couldn't win and losing it on a staggering scale. So the world today is a safer place. We're still not a safe place because although Donald Trump very wisely has tried to pull back a bit on the anti-Russian craziness, the anti-Russian insanity of our own government, I'm not just talking about Starmer, I'm talking about the whole pack, the Tories, the whole works of them. The Restore Reform, they sometimes waver a little bit. But overall, the British establishment is absolutely hell-bent on confronting Russia, as is the establishment of Germany and the rest of the European Union. So we're not out of the woods yet, but it's a much safer world now, given that the insane, desperately, psychotically dangerous dominance of Middle Eastern politics by the bandit state of Israel has come to a grinding end. Right, I'm going to jump into the chat here, see what we've got here. Kit Bear, Israel's been saying that since 1990. What about the bombs? Yes, indeed. Ivan, by using cheap drones to deplete their stockpiles, then send in the big stuff. Yep. We in the British Army under Starmer would send them by Uber. There's no shortage of drivers. You are right there. Yeah, indeed. They have been guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. I guess part of the deal actually is to shove all that under the carpet. And in a way, I can sympathize with that because all talk about, war crimes. There's something in a way fundamentally wrong with that. It hides the fact that all war is a crime. Sometimes it's a necessary crime. But I don't know when the last time Britain went to war necessarily, when it really had to, other arguably in the Falklands Islands, when even then, if John Not Muggy Thatcher hadn't pulled the support vessels, the Royal Navy presence, out of South Georgia and out of the Falklands in the first place, the Argies wouldn't have got the idea they had a green light to go and invade. So even that war was actually partly created, not just by the Argentine junta wanting something to unite their people, but also by the follies and the cutbacks of a conservative government. But at least once we were fighting it, that was a cut and cleared war. The Falklands are British. Every single person living on those islands is British and wants to remain British, and is surrounded by vast areas of continental shelf, which is probably very, very valuable. So it's a British asset. That was worth fighting for. But the others? Second World War, we fought for the independence of gallant little Poland. Except we only went to war with half of the countries who'd invaded and dismembered Poland. So we went to war with Germany, but not with the Soviet Union, who'd marched into and stamped all over Poland on the same day. First World War, we went into the war to guarantee the independence of gallant little Belgium. We failed dismally. And halfway through the war, the Germans said, okay, let's stop this. We'll pull out. We won't go into Belgium again. We'll give reparations for the Belgians for all the damage we did, blah, blah, blah. It was a really, really serious, sensible peace offer. And various people, vainglorious British politicians, the American deep state, even then, the Zionist lobby, the industrialists, they all wanted that war to continue. And it continued for another 2 ghastly years. So none of these wars are any good. I tell you again, read my lips. All wars are a crime. Right, John Kopasaki has joined us. Good morning to you, sir. Just checking him all working. So pleased to see you. Great stuff. And Paul Telford again. Yep. Hello, Paul. Good to see you too. Right then. Thank you, John. I belong here. Well, I belong many places, actually. But yeah, I know I belong here talking with you good folks. Right, let me dive back into the other huge news of the week, or the couple of weeks, the riots. First of all, the appalling, not just the killing of Henry Novak, young English lad stabbed by immigrant. The only unusual thing about the Henry Novak case is it made the headlines. It's happened to scores, hundreds of our young men for the last 20, 30, 40 years. When the British National Party was campaigning against the grooming gang scandal, trying to bring that to the fore, it was very clearly with us only one side of the coin. And the other side, it's the same coin. A rotten black piece of metal it is too. The other side of the grooming of the girls was brutal racist attacks up to and including brutal murder of white lads. But that's been completely buried. None of the counter Clash of Civilization people want to discuss that. They're only going for the girls thing. Well, it needs exposing, it needs dealing with. Yes, those girls still need justice. But they're only attacking that because actually when you really, really want to wind people up to go to war, then talk about sex, that's what does it. They did it in the First World War. They always do it. You know, Germans raping nuns and all the rest of this nonsense. So in this case, the grooming gangs, it's true. The Germans raping nuns and bathing babies, none of it was true. But that's a different story. But yeah, that needs exposing. It needs dealing with. But equally, the mass murder and maiming of huge numbers of young lads, scores, hundreds at the same period, they buried it, which shouldn't be buried. But anyway, it's all come out now and we've seen the riots. So as I say, Henry Novak, nothing unusual. What was unusual that it came out, and the appalling way that the police treated handcuffing and mocking a dying boy brought out absolutely more than anything else could have done the genuinely two-tier nature, the fact that we, the indigenous people in our own homelands, are second-class citizens. Now, if the nationalist movement was better organised and really effective, this would have been an even more powerful moment. The image of that dying boy's white hand in a sort of clenched fist, but not quite. That, there should have been demonstrations everywhere. In every single demonstration, all the demonstrators should have been kneeling, holding that arms up in the air in that, chanting not just "I can't breathe," which Henry Novak, of course, did say, but more important to the police, take the knee, take the knee, take the knee. Because the police wouldn't have taken the knee in all probability, but there's picture after picture after picture of, during the riots for George Floyd, a career criminal and woman abuser of staggering proportions. Everyone remember, it wasn't just Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner who took the knee, it was police officers up and down the country. And the fact that probably now, if it was done on Henry Novak demonstrations or similar, and there'll be others, the police will refuse to take the knee. Nothing could more show the British people who still think that the police perhaps are basically okay, or just, they're under pressure from above. They're okay, generally, have to be nice to them. They keep us safe. No, they don't. They keep us under control. They are the boot boys of the enemy. And the fact that not one of them would kneel if challenged to for Henry Novak would show that more than anything else. So it's a bit of a missed opportunity. But nevertheless, things have changed. And you have seen large numbers of people and a whole, not particularly militant English city, Southampton, go up in serious unrest over the police handling of this. That's a good thing. Huh? Nick Griffin saying it, riots are a good thing. Yes, I am. Riots are the language of the unheard. I think it was Martin Luther King said that. So, absolutely, you can't question that, can you? Not if you're politically correct. Riots are the language of the unheard. Well, the British people aren't unheard. That's ridiculous. Come on. 17.4 million British voters. And there's 8 or 9 million more who are so disgusted with politics they're not even registered to vote. So you can put 8 million on the 17.4 million. You can get to 25, 26 million Brits very clearly, either by voting or refusing even to register to vote, have graphically indicated that they are disgusted with the political elite, and 17.4 million of them, mainly on the issue overwhelmingly on the issue of immigration, said to the British government, take back control. Do something about it. Get us back our country. And the government's response, the Conservative government response, with the avid backing of the Lib Dems and the Labour Party and the SNP and so on, and with the ministers in charge, including key members now of Reform, the whole British political establishment said, up yours, to the 17.4 million British voters and the 8 million who are so angry they can't even stomach going to vote. They simply ignored us, not worse than ignored us. They spat in our face and introduced first the Boris wave and then the Starmer wave of further mass immigration. The only difference being it's far more than we had before. And instead of Polish plumbers, we are getting Pakistanis and Hindus and all Africans and all the rest of them. That was a deliberate up yours to the British people. So we're not just unheard, we are utterly despised. So yes, the only way to deal with that sometimes is to riot. It's as simple as that. There are other methods. And again, if the nationalist movement was better organised, and it's going to become better organised because we're now in a historical process which will not stop. Doesn't matter if individuals, myself, you, if we put our shoulders to the wheel and push and set out our experience, we will make it happen quicker. But it's going to happen in any case. We can make it happen in a more organised way, but it'll happen in a disorganised way and it'll become organised. Change is coming. And the one thing that now is being said in response to these riots, and I heard it from the Reform candidate in Makerfield the other day, he said very piously, oh, of course, violence is never the answer. Really? Why do they always use violence against us then? And I include in that the legal system, the court, the police, the courts, the prisons. That's all violence. They use violence against us all the time. Because violence, well, let me reword it slightly so I'm not misunderstood. Let's stop using the word violence and say force. Force is never the answer, they tell us. You can only go through the ballot box. That's the only thing. We went through the ballot box. 17.4 million of us went through the ballot box and they bloody ignored us, then spat in our face. So something else is necessary. So force probably is the answer because they use force against us. It works for them. Yeah. It worked for the George Floyd rioters. It worked for the St. Paul's rioters in Bristol in 1980, for the Brixton rioters, for the Pakistani rioters in Oldham in 2001. It works for them. Force worked for the IRA. Actually, it worked for the EDA as well. Yeah, force does work, is the lesson that they've told us. They've taught us. And actually, it's a very, very dangerous lesson. Let me just jump back into the chat here. And what have we got? Still, yeah, indeed, talking. Yeah, Ivan, you deserve justice, Nick, as well as an apology from the nation. The first to highlight all of this and never give them credit. History will. But actually, there was, Ivan, there was a most remarkable piece last week from the AYAN Foundation, which is a Muslim think tank in London. Quite a serious one, actually. And they produced a big sort of poster meme and put it out on X with a very long explanation as to what they're talking about. And they simply asked, who is the most influential British politician in the last 30 years? And the answer was me, Nick Griffin. Wow. And they went through it. You look at what Nick Griffin and the BNP were saying, the things they were demanding. And now look at what basically all the parties, including to a degree even the Labour government, are saying about cutting immigration and so on. And they just ticked off the box. This came from the BNP, this came from the BNP, that came from the BNP, that came from Nick Griffin, this came from Nick Griffin. Quite remarkable stuff. And their very apposite comment was, Nick Griffin lost the battle, but he won the war. Well, that's not a bad epitaph, actually, is it? But I ain't finished yet. I ain't finished yet by a long chalk. And one of the things I'm doing is at present, I'm writing a very serious essay on the question of resistance to evil through force. Now, to do that, to deal with this question of violence is never the answer, because one of the key problem of this, the idea that we can only go through an electoral system which is fundamentally corrupt and bent and will not respond to us in any way, shape or form. If we built a party, had it been a general election when Brexit was on, and had 17.4 million Brits been backing a revolutionary nationalist party, which would really sort this out, the revolutionary nationalist party would have been banned before the election, just like they were in Flanders, in Belgium, the Vlaams Bloc, just like they were in Greece, Golden Dawn, just like they were in Slovakia, Cop Labour's party. And all our elites go along with these things. The same would happen here. There's no point having massive power at the ballot box unless you've also got the power through a general strike, through putting 1 million people on the streets in Birmingham, 2 million on the streets in London, dominating the whole country, turning off the electricity at will. If you can do that, as well as have a majority in Parliament, then you'll come to power because they won't be able to stop you. But if you haven't got that capacity to turn out on the street, forget it. They'll simply ban you and it's all over. Now, the real danger of this, telling people that violence isn't the answer, but then denying them any capability of making any possible change or even an effective protest about what's going on, is that it will actually turn people away from anything apart from terrorism. Nihilistic, destructive, monstrously cruel, counterproductive terrorism. That's the risk. If enough people believe that violence is never the answer, so we mustn't do anything other than go into elections, then we will fail so dismally that real violence, crazy violence, the nihilistic violence of the desperate and the hopeless is what we will get. And see, the thing is that there is a middle road, a good road, between surrender on the one hand and nihilistic terrorism on the other. And it's not violence. I'm not talking about guns and bombs. It's moral force, the application, the use. I'm not talking airy-fairy ideas here, I'm talking about actual moral force. Gandhi was a fantastic example, the way in which he pushed to get the Brits out of India. That was done not through physical violence. There were Indians who wanted physical violence. They signed it with the Japanese. But it was done through moral force. It wasn't done by begging the Brits. It was just done by doing things which the Brits couldn't cope with. So there are ways to do this. So I'm writing right now a very serious essay on resistance to evil through force. To do this, I had to read the classic book, named, would you believe it, On Resistance to Evil by Force, by Ivan Alexandrovich Ilyin, who was a white Russian, a Russian immigrant, I think, at one stage. He wrote this in 1923. Here he is. Don't know if you can see that there. This was the chap, long deceased, of course. And he wrote this book as an explanation to Russians as to why Tolstoy was wrong. Tolstoy was hugely popular among people on the Russian Christian sort of right in general terms. And Tolstoy was a pacifist. And in this book, Ilyin argued very, very strongly and firmly that sometimes you're up against something which is so evil, so concrete, so implacable, that if you give way to it and say, we'll only use passive resistance, then you yourself become guilty. So I waded through this thing. And I have to say, oh, by the way, it's said to be Vladimir Putin's favorite book, which tells me that Vladimir Putin has a much bigger brain than me, or perhaps he's got a continental brain, not a British brain. Because I read through this thing. I tried to read it several times, a couple of years ago, actually, and failed, just as I've tried to read Decline of the West, Spengler's monumental volume, several times, and never managed it, because it's continental philosophy. You know what? I hate it. I hate intellectuals. I detest philosophy. Word after word, sentence after sentence, paragraph after paragraph, page after page of waffly bullshit. Just goes on and on. I'm going to open this at random and read you a couple of lines to give you an idea what I had to go through for you to read this and what I mean. So here we are. This does not mean that the sentimental moralist rejects all self-sacrifice and is not in any way capable of it. There are such acute cases when he directly advises to put oneself in the place of the person being killed or to sacrifice one's life. I think he's talking about Tolstoy here. However, with careful analysis, it is found he sacrifices his life not for the sake of saving his beloved, but for his own righteousness. For as already established, the answer to the dilemma must bear in mind those cases in which only physical resistance against the oppressor can save the loved one, rather than offering of oneself as a substitute for the murder victim. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of that. It's not like the modern total pseudo-philosophical junk that comes out of the likes of Nick Land and the various neo-reactionary philosophers that various phonies on the moronic right claim are such wonderful thinkers. They just stream of consciousness drivel waffle with deliberately using things so complex that no one can possibly understand them to hide the fact they have nothing to say. Now, Ilyin has a lot to say, but he says it's such, I'd say, excessive detail. God knows when I write too much, but I don't do anything like this. So I boiled the whole of Ilyin's wonderful book down to 3 paragraphs for you to save you having to read it. Here they are. And they're in this. I've lifted these directly from the first draft of my essay on resistance to evil through force. So this is the crux of what Ilyin says. Evil can be real, deliberate, destructive, and implacable. Some individuals and movements consciously seek domination, cruelty, and destruction of moral order. In such circumstances, appeals to conscience, persuasion, and personal example may prove insufficient. A person who encounters evil like this cannot always overcome it through passive endurance alone. A person who refuses to resist such an aggressor may keep his own hands clean, but in doing so, he leaves the innocent undefended. Christian love is not merely a matter of refusing to do harm, it also requires the active protection of others from harm. Under certain circumstances, therefore, resistance to evil may require coercion and even physical force. He then goes on with his caveat. Violence is not something good in itself. It's not to be recommended or entered into lightly. Force remains a tragic necessity rather than a positive moral achievement. The soldier, police officer, judge, or citizen who acts to restrain evil does not escape moral burden because his cause is just. The use of force inevitably involves suffering, guilt, and spiritual danger, but it remains, in the face of genuine evil, a moral necessity. So that's it. You now know all you need to know about Ivan Ilyin's On Resistance to Evil by Force. You owe me, at least if you're a fairly fast reader, you owe me at least 10 hours of your life. Right. So in this essay I'm writing, I also look at an earlier, now Ilyin, of course, was very much a Christian, an Orthodox Christian, but I also look at the just war theory developed by the Catholic founding fathers of the Roman Catholic Church, particularly Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, Saint Thomas Aquinas. So I look at their theories as well. What do I conclude? That we, traditionalists, lovers of our people in our land, the people who understood that what happened to Henry Novak wasn't some isolated horror, but part and parcel of a consistent effort to dispossess, demoralize, and replace us in our own homeland. That we know is an evil. It's an evil on such a scale that it must be resisted. And since our electoral resistance, 17.4 million people voting as well the elite knew against immigration, since that has been utterly thrown back in our face, we have to use force. What sort of force? Well, force comes, this is the crux of my argument, the force comes in two distinct forms. There's physical force and there's moral force. And there are times when you have a right to use physical force in self-defense of yourself, your family, your home, your country, or your people against all comers, including your own government. There comes a time when that's the case, but it's not automatic because there's also moral force. And for moral and for tactical reasons, it's wrong, always wrong, and it's wrong right now, to use physical force of any kind, including rioting, until all moral force avenues have been explored and used and exhausted. I can tell you this, as a long-term, first of all, an activist, then a militant, and then an organizer, and then a leader of the British resistance, I can tell you that we've scarcely even begun to use the possibilities of moral force in Britain or anywhere in the West. And therefore, physical force is illegitimate and likely counterproductive. Now, I'm not condemning the rioters. I condemn the circumstances which made them feel they had to riot. I condemn the police who always, under these circumstances, poke and prod and abuse and try to cause violence, not because they think that violence besmirches the cause, but because they know it'll be violence on a scale that they can deal with. So it empowers them. That's why they do it. So I'm not going to condemn the rioters, but it's very sad that these people feel they have to riot like that in order to try and make a point, instead of being able to settle down and organise to secure their places, to make it so the police aren't needed in their areas, and find it very difficult to go in there unless they have the consent of ordinary people. And to get the consent of the British people, they have to treat the British people fairly. So, but that's a long way off, but it'll only come when our people are organised and using moral force tactics. We haven't got to that yet. So as an example, from the riots in Belfast the other day, about 20 streets, small streets in East Belfast, around the Lower Newtonards Road, are now more indigenous than they were before, because 300 or 400 families, some cases individuals, in other cases whole families of incomers, have been put out. Now, Britain's Muslims are rather dishonestly at present saying this was an anti-Muslim pogrom. All these people were put out because they were Muslims. No, they weren't. It's a lie. The people in Northern Ireland are quite capable of putting out every last Muslim in Northern Ireland if they feel pushed to it. But that's not what this is about. The people pushed out were Africans and Roma, and nobody else was targeted, because it's the Africans and the Roma who've been causing problems. Not all of them. Some of them, the Africans, are there working in the local hospitals and so on. They're doing good work. They shouldn't be doing it. They should be working in their own hospitals back home in Uganda, while our unemployed people should have been trained to work in our hospitals. So stealing them from Africa is not a good thing. But nevertheless, they were there. They've been there doing decent work on our behalf and paying, out of their pitiful wages, large amounts of tax, same as everybody else. But they've been forced out of their houses just as much as the criminal vermin have been. So there's a change there, but it's only affected those 20 streets. Oh, by the way, I must tell you this, that I've written about this on Substack, but I haven't said it anywhere, that during the riots in the Lower Newtonards Road, the bottom of the Lower Newtonards Road by the bridge over the Lagan, there's a little triangle of streets cut off from all the rest. That's the Short Strand. that's extremely hardcore Catholic Irish nationalist Republican. And during these riots, 20 or 30 young lads came out of the Short Strand. So these are Catholic nationalist youth, all of them with the full double surgical gloves and the balaclavas on and the same dark coloured jackets, came out and joined the otherwise Protestant loyalist crowd. Now, any stage in the last, well, ever since 1930, when briefly there were hunger riots, which brought the two communities together, at any stage in the last 100 years apart from that, in fact, ever since East Belfast was built, ever since the Short Strand was there, that young lads had come out of the Short Strand, tooled up, ready to go, and had met with loyalists from the surrounding streets, there would have been a riot between them. But just as Bibi Netanyahu and Donald Trump have managed to bring the Sunni and the Shia together, so the Africans and the Roma and British government wicked policies have brought the Catholics and the Protestants together in parts of Belfast. So this crowd of 20 or 30 young Republicans joined in with their loyalist neighbours, and together they attacked the police and ethnically cleansed their streets. In fact, the one who burnt the £400,000 bus apparently was a lad wearing a tricolour balaclava, a Republican, a Taig, as the prods would call him. Altogether, because they can see their area, their community, being steadily taken over by outsiders, and they know perfectly well that while the first of those outsiders, well, there's not that many of them and they're working in the hospital, all the rest of it, there's not much trouble from them. Once they get enough of them there, everything changes. And they don't want to see happening in Belfast what we know has happened in London and Birmingham, Manchester, etc., etc. So they came out. But all they've achieved is that about 20 small streets are more indigenous now than they were before. But nothing has been done. Nothing will be done from that sort of protest to encourage the natives, us, to have children, to fill the houses that are empty in the first place, to do the jobs that they weren't people to do in the first place. Or even if the loyalists set out, now those houses are empty, if they set out through their networks and through social media to say to mainland Brits living in Clapham or Sparkbrook or somewhere like that, if you've had enough of living there, come over here, because these empty houses are available to you. Come over, join our community. Get your kids to join our bands. Become us, because we are proud to be British. And we know you are too. But you can't be proud to be British in Sparkhill, Brixton, because it's gone. So come here instead. If those things were being done, that'd make this something which is long-term sustainable. The demographic black hole problem of Protestant East Belfast lies completely unaddressed. 20 streets are whiter, using the crudest possible BBC term, but about 2 million Muslim men on the mainland are right now actively thinking about how they're going to defend their communities if this comes to them. While millions of our people have actually seen this going on, and they think, well, that's okay. All we need to sort out Britain is a bit of a riot like the Irish had, because that's how ignorant these people are. Not Irish at all, of course, apart from the 20 or 30 out of the Short Strand. A bit of a riot like they had in Northern Ireland. We'll vote for Nigel or we'll vote for Rupert in 2029 and everything's all right. I can go back to watching the World Cup and drinking me cheap lager. No, they cannot. We've got to do much, much better than that, starting with the serious organisation of our communities. Right, let me bounce back into the chat here. And Lady M has joined us. Good to see you. Having a new kitchen built, a woman's shed. A kitchen isn't only a woman's shed, Lady M. No, a kitchen's sometimes my shed. I love cooking. It's tremendous. It's a very relaxing thing. All through the worst stresses and strains of BNP days, Jim Dowson used to say to me, how on earth can you stay so calm? My answer to that is that Jim very rarely cooks. I cook a lot. Makes you calm. Right, and Kit Bear agrees with me. I'm not sure if Kit agrees with me about cooking or about what I said just now about the need to organise our community. In either case, well, Kit's very sensible. He probably agrees with both. And in any case, you know I am right. Kit says, seriously, they'll never treat us fairly. We're less than third-class citizens in our own countries. Absolutely right, both. Good man. And that is exactly the position, and it's why we have to get down to serious organisation, to the application of moral force, because things such as organising a community patrol, in your own area, or organising a food operation whereby you go out and take soup and hots and sandwiches and so on to the homeless, and where you look after pensioners who can't look after themselves, and where in the event, and it's coming, when the sort of chaos which is coming our way leads to English refugees flooding out of Leicester and Nottingham and Derby into the surrounding areas, where are the young nationalists going to be who then go and help to feed those people in the couple of weeks of their most urgent need? Because at present there's nothing. And that's the big difference. You see, people are going to look right now, the idiots are looking at what happened in Belfast thinking that will happen here too, we'll soon sort them out. If a couple of hundred young men with 20 or 30 others from neighbouring streets join together in Belfast, East Belfast, they can do whatever they want with the ethnic minorities. Good, bad or indifferent, whether they should or they shouldn't. They can do whatever they want because the ethnic minorities there are isolated pockets of individuals. They're not really in a community yet. 200 or 300 white Brits go into huge swathes of Birmingham, London, Luton, Bradford, Oldham, Leeds, etc., etc., etc. They will die because the immigrant communities, and especially the Muslims, are far better organised, and they are much, much, much more numerous than the ones in Northern Ireland. This is going to be completely different. And when the riots really start on the mainland, and the extra confidence that this is watching Northern Ireland has given various people who are as brave as they are stupid, when they go in to the edges of some areas on the mainland and it kicks off, we won't see 400 or 500 Africans and Roma fleeing from an area. It'll be 4,000 or 5,000 of our people from one area and another and another and another. And the greatest act of moral force and gaining credibility and power and sinking roots and getting into the hearts and minds of our people that any nationalist or traditionalist organisation or group of people in Britain, mainland Britain, could do right now is to start organising so that when it does kick off like that, they are capable of going to 100, 200, 300 very scared, very frightened people in a community centre somewhere in rural Nottinghamshire, where they fled from burning Nottingham, and helping them while they're there and giving them food and drink and making a good job of it. And you can't do it bang like that. I could do it. I could do it with several of my kids. We've done it for years at BNP events. I know exactly how to do it. Most people don't. But you can do it if you start by, once you can cater for 15 people in your own little group, you can upscale it very easily. These are the sort of things. It may seem very simple and mundane when we're talking about the fate, the future, the fate of an entire nation. But history is made by people who do practical things which impact on other ordinary people in a real practical way, and thereby give the ideas that they have to talk about and put across real concrete power. These things are important. Right then, I better finish up there. Tomorrow is the election in Makerfield, where the question is, will Andy Burnham win? The answer is almost certainly yes, because Reform, I don't actually think Reform particularly want to win this seat. Strange that. But if they do, all hell will be poured upon them. And if they lose it, the Labour Party will get a little bit, what's the right word? Complacent. And the far left will get complacent. They'll be left alone a little bit and so on. So it won't be the end of Nigel Farage if Reform don't win. But if Andy Burnham wins, it will be the end of Keir Starmer. So it's another reason that a lot of people who hate Starmer so much, they'll vote for Burnham thinking he will get rid of Starmer. He'll be better. No, he won't. He will be even worse. People will find that out soon enough. So soon, and Burnham knows that I believe that once he becomes PM, we will either very rapidly have an election, which you know he will lose, but he won't lose it by too much, and we'll end up with a leftist coalition government, or he'll let it run until 2029, and we will have proportional representation so that Reform cannot win, even if Restore simply go away, which they may or they may not. So we face a left-wing Burnham government until 2034, during which time the demographic shifts that will go on in Britain as they open the doors to probably 1 million immigrants every single year, while 300, 400, 500,000 of us and our kids flee the country as fast as they possibly can. The demographic shift of that over 5 years is 5 million extra of them. 2.5 million of us gone. Another 2.5 million of us died because we're pretty old. To 10 million shift in 5 years. Oh, sorry, 8 years or so. That's it. Good night, Vienna. So I'll watch the Makerfield result with interest, and you probably would as well. But don't worry about it, whatever happens. Forget, this is it. This is the crux of what I've got to say to you. Forget the electoral circus. Doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. That whoever's elected cannot change the general direction in any case. They merely decide what tune is the last tune is played as the Titanic sinks below the waves. That's it. Forget the electoral circus. We've only got one job: to organise our people to apply moral force effectively, intelligently, and consistently to secure our rights in our own country. Right, I'm going to leave you with what I think is a very apposite end slate. Now, it's a bit rough. You all know, of course, that I'm dead keen on folk music. This isn't folksy at all. What only a few of you know is I still also quite like a bit of the rather punky stuff from the later 70s and very, very early 80s. Now, I know that the Clash were a leftist band. They were heavily involved in efforts against the National Front before the BNP even existed. But I think they were a damn good band. I think the White Riot is quite apposite, especially the line, white people go to school where they teach you to be thick. They also teach you to believe that violence is never the answer, that just fighting elections is the only way to have political change. They teach you all sorts of nonsense in schools. And these days, of course, they also teach kids that they can chop off their bits and pieces and choose from one of at least 72 other genders. The lesson of that, my friends, finally for the day, is if you do have children, homeschool them. Don't send them anywhere near that giant sexual grooming gang of perverts known as the British Teachers' Unions. I will leave you on that note. Please do join me next Wednesday, same time, next place. And until then, do remember that for the triumph of evil, all that is necessary is that good men and women should do nothing. So you get out and do something